Welcome to This Explainer. I am so thrilled you're joining us today because we're about to unpack something that completely challenges the very foundation of how we think about learning. We're talking about the pedagogy of experience, way beyond the classroom. Now look, we live in a world absolutely obsessed with standardized tests, GPA scores, and academic rankings, right? But what if our entire definition of an examination is just fundamentally flawed? Today, we're taking a deep dive into a super fascinating historical case study drawn from ancient texts. It totally redefines what it truly means to be tested, and honestly, what it actually means to be educated. So let's dive right in and flip our modern perspective completely on its head.
So, have you ever heard of an exam with absolutely no classroom, no paper, and 0 grades? I know, it sounds kind of like a trick question, doesn't it? When we hear the word exam, our brains immediately jump to images of those dead silent rooms, the ticking clocks, endless rows of desks, and the frantic scribbling of pens on paper. We think about strict rubrics and percentages, but I actually want you to erase that image from your mind for the next few minutes. We're going to explore an entirely different paradigm of assessment today, one that measures something way, way deeper than just rote memorization. And this really gets to the core difference we're unpacking today. Modern exams rely heavily on books, notes, and written papers. It's a hyper-academic focus, where success basically just means we're calling info onto a blank page. But let's contrast that with Gurukul exams. Now, a Gurukul was an ancient Indian residential school system where students actually lived with their guru, or teacher. And in this system, the ultimate test had absolutely no classroom walls, no parchment, no numerical grades. It was this holistic evaluation of a person's entire character. You know, over time, we've kind of traded the vast, unpredictable wilderness of real-world application for the sterile, heavily controlled environment of a testing center.
Let's look at Section 1, Exam Without a Classroom.
And Section 2, the Maharishi's unique challenge. To really wrap our heads around this ancient educational model, we need to meet our protagonist. His name is Vidagdha. Now, he was a brilliant, highly intelligent student studying under the revered sage Maharishi Jarodakuru. By modern standards, Vidagdha was, well, he was perfect, a top-tier scholar who had completely mastered all the theories, all the texts. But the Maharishi noticed a pretty profound gap in his education. Because mere book knowledge is never really enough, is it? Intellectual brilliance without practical resilience, it's kind of like having a super powerful engine in a car, but no steering wheel. So the Maharishi set up a very specific, totally unconventional exam. He didn't hand Vidagdha a massive thesis to write. Nope. He handed him exactly 100 cows. He literally told his brightest pupil to leave the comfort and safety of the Gurukul, head deep into the untamed forest, and just take his textbooks with him.
But here's the kicker. That was just the starting point. The condition for him to even be allowed back, 1,000. The Maharishi told Vidagdha he absolutely could not return to the school until that initial herd of 100 cows had multiplied into a massive herd of 1,000. Just think about the sheer scale of that task for a second, a tenfold increase. This wasn't some weekend retreat or a quick summer internship. This was a monumental, completely open-ended challenge. It forced compounding growth, intense patience, and systemic management. There was no deadline, no syllabus, just a seemingly impossible goal and the vast, wide-open unknown of the forest.
Which brings us to Section 3, 12 years in the forest. So the forest itself literally became his new classroom. Vidagdha traded the polished, safe floors of the ashram for rugged mountains, sprawling plains, and super dense woods. And sure, at first, grazing a herd of cows might have felt like a fun, novel adventure, but then those days turned into months. The initial excitement faded fast, replaced by extreme isolation and just the relentless, grueling daily routine of survival. And then, the months bled into years. Really think about the heavy psychological weight of that passage of time, 12 long years. For over a decade, this brilliant scholar was totally isolated from his peers, subjected to the absolute ultimate test of patience, just watching the slow, gradual process of life unfolding and multiplying without a single shortcut. And let me tell you, those 12 years were anything but peaceful. He had to survive some brutal extremes. We're talking of blistering heat, torrential monsoons, and freezing cold nights. And he wasn't just looking out for himself, right? He had to fend off wild animals, protecting a growing, vulnerable herd of cattle from predators like tigers and wolves. On top of all that, he had to secure food and basic safety for himself every single day. I mean, today a lot of us kind of panic if the Wi-Fi drops out during an online quiz. Meanwhile, Vidagdha was out there standing his ground against apex predators. Seriously, could a textbook ever teach you the exact split-second moment to brace for a wild animal attack? Could sitting in a lecture hall prepare you for the gnawing, physical ache of true hunger? Obviously not. These are visceral, intense sensory trials that demand immediate, highly practical action. Moving on to section 4, from knowledge to experience. Now, the intense crucible of the forest didn't erase Vidagda's book knowledge. Remember, he actually brought his books with him out there. But what it did do was force him to forge all that theoretical knowledge into something significantly stronger, real worldly wisdom. And this incredible transformation happened through 3 very distinct steps. First up, meeting people. Because even out in the wilderness, he encountered travelers and forest dwellers. He had to learn how to read people, how to negotiate, and how to communicate completely outside his comfortable academic bubble. Step 2 was problem solving. Think about it. When a cow fell sick or a water source suddenly dried up, there was no professor standing by to hand him the answer key. He had to diagnose, experiment, and solve the problem right there in real time. And finally, step 3, leadership. As his herd grew from 100 to 500 and eventually closer to 1,000, he was managing a massive, highly complex operation. He became a real leader out of pure, unavoidable necessity. His books alone could have never, ever instilled these dynamic life skills. Then, finally, after 12 grueling years, the condition was met. He returned with 1,000 cows and this unshakable confidence. Imagine the scene, Vidagda marching back into the Gurukul, followed by a massive, thundering herd of 1,000 cattle. It's an incredible image. But, it wasn't just the cows that had multiplied. The student himself had grown exponentially. When he walked through those gates, he was absolutely not the same boy who had left all those years ago. He radiated this entirely newfound maturity. His thinking was visibly deeper, truly grounded in the brutal yet beautiful reality of nature. He possessed this quiet, unshakable confidence that you can really only earn through surviving genuine hardship.
And the Maharishi's reaction? Well, it was exactly what you'd expect from a true master teacher. When Maharishi Jarakuru looked at Vidagda, he didn't just see a student who finally finished a really long chore. He saw a true leader, not just a scholar. He felt immense joy seeing his pupil evolve from this walking repository of facts into a highly capable, incredibly resilient human being. Vidagda finally had the worldly wisdom required to actually guide others. And because he passed this ultimate grueling test of experience, the Maharishi confidently entrusted him with the heavy responsibilities of running the entire Gurukul. He knew, for a fact, that it was in the hands of someone who truly understood life.
This brings us to our final section, section 5, Life, the Biggest Exam. It's pretty easy to listen to an old story about sages and cows and just kind of dismiss it as a nice little myth. But the underlying pedagogical framework here is incredibly urgent for us today. We spend the entire first quarter of our lives prepping for tests in classrooms, but we so often forget that the classroom is really just the waiting room. The actual assessment, it's everything that happens after you leave it. To fix modern education, we absolutely must integrate these essential modern additions. We can't just rely on written papers anymore. We desperately need practical experience. We need to get our hands dirty in our fields. We need to emphasize service, truly understanding how to interact with diverse groups of people. And we have to actively cultivate leadership and tangible life skills, things like financial literacy and deep emotional resilience. Because when we integrate these elements, we stop just churning out mere degree holders who crumble at the very first sign of real-world adversity. Instead, we start creating true, resilient builders of society, exactly like Vidagda. The overarching truth we're looking at here is that exams don't just happen in a classroom. Life itself is the biggest examination hall. Every single challenge you face at work, every interpersonal conflict you have to navigate, every time you have to completely pivot when your perfectly laid plans fall apart, that is your 100 cows in the forest. That is your real exam. So I want to leave you with this final thought. If your life was graded today, and I mean really graded, not by the fancy degrees hanging on your wall, but by your resilience, your problem solving, and your practical wisdom in the face of the totally unknown, what score would you really get? Think about it. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.